He laughed when the plane started shaking, and I wanted to punch him for it. Who laughs in the middle of turbulence that feels like God's shaking a snow globe with us inside? But that laugh, it was so reckless, so alive that I think it's the only reason I didn't lose my mind before we slammed into the trees. When I opened my eyes again, the world was fire and twisted metal, and his hand was already pulling me out of the wreckage. That was the first time I realized, maybe fate had dragged me down just to chain me to him. The air smelled of smoke and pine. My ears rang like church bells collapsing in a storm. I remember trying to stand, stumbling, my knees giving way, until his arm hooked under mine and forced me upright. His name was Evan, though at that moment, all I knew was his voice, rough and commanding, cutting through chaos. Stay with me. Don't close your eyes. We're getting out of here. And I did. Not because I was strong, but because he sounded like he'd fight the earth itself if it tried to swallow me. Hours later, when the flames dimmed and the cries of other survivors turned to silence, it was just the two of us. Two strangers in the middle of nowhere, stitched together by catastrophe. Think anyone's coming? I asked, my throat raw from smoke. He didn't answer right away. His gaze swept the broken horizon, jaw set, blood drying on his temple. Finally, he said, if they are, it won't be tonight. We need shelter. That was the beginning. The beginning of nights where I would hear him breathe next to me in the dark. Each inhale proof that I wasn't alone. The beginning of days where we stumbled through wreckage and wilderness. Two broken bodies trying to outlast a cruel miracle. And the beginning of something else too, something I didn't want to name yet. Something I was too afraid to. The first night was unbearable. We had nothing but scraps of fabric and a dying fire we'd sparked from seat cushions and wire. I shook so badly I thought my bones might break. But then Evan slid closer, his shoulder brushing mine. Cold? He asked. I wanted to say no. Pride is stupid like that. But my teeth chattered too loud to lie. He wrapped an arm around me, slow and cautious, as though testing whether I'd push him away. I couldn't. His chest was warm, steady, and smelled of smoke and salt. It was the safest I'd felt since before the world fell out of the sky. I won't let anything happen to you, he whispered, as if promising himself more than me. And two believed him. Morning brought cruel sunlight. My leg throbbed with every step, but Evan wouldn't let me stop. He scavenged for food, tore strips from his shirt to wrap my wound, and cursed at the sky as if the clouds might feel guilty enough to rain mercy down on us. We fought, of course. God, did we fight? You can't just play hero every second. I snapped once, when he tried to drag me across a stream I couldn't manage. You'll kill yourself before you save me. Maybe I don't care. He shouted back, veins standing out in his neck. Maybe keeping you alive is the only thing keeping me alive. The words hung there, sharp and naked, between us. He turned away, muttering something I couldn't catch. My chest ached, not from injury, but from the way his voice had cracked when he said it. As days blurred, survival became routine. We built shelter from branches, collected rainwater, and rationed scraps. But at night the nights were different. Nights belonged to whispers and warmth, to the slow collapse of boundaries neither of us admitted we wanted gone. Sometimes I'd wake to find his arm draped across me, heavy and possessive, like his body was guarding me even in dreams. Other times, I catch him watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher, half anger, half devotion, and all fire. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt alive. Then came the storm. It ripped through the forest like a vengeful god, lightning splitting trees, rain drowning the ground beneath us. Our shelter collapsed, leaving us soaked and shivering. clutching each other under the broken sky. I pressed my forehead to his chest, tasting salt and fear. "We're not gonna make it," I said, though I didn't mean it. What I meant was hold me tighter. Don't let go. His hands gripped my face, forcing me to look at him through the downpour. His eyes burned, fierce even in the storm. "Yes, we are," he growled. "Because I refuse to lose you." And then, maybe it was the thunder, or the way the world felt like it might split open, but his lips crashed onto mine, desperate and raw, like survival wasn't enough anymore. That kiss haunted me long after the storm passed. We didn't speak of it, not directly, but everything shifted. The way his hand lingered on my back. The way my name sounded softer when he said it. The way silence between us felt less like emptiness and more like promise. I didn't know what we were. Survivors. Strangers. Something more. But I knew one thing. I couldn't sleep without him near me anymore. And I had the sinking suspicion couldn't either. The days blurred, stitched together by hunger and hope. It's strange how quickly the human body adapts when it has no other choice, how the mind stops craving comfort and starts bargaining with necessity. Food became berries, roots, and the occasional rabbit Evan managed to trap. Water became puddles cupped in our hands. And warmth became him. I told myself it was survival. That was the only way I could explain why I pressed against him each night. My cheek against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart as if it were my lullaby. But deep down, I knew survival wasn't the whole story. Evan carried himself like he was built for burden, but I caught glimpses of cracks. The way he lingered on a photo salvaged from his Waleda woman, smiling with 2 kids at her side. His sister and her children. He told me once, when I asked. He didn't know if they were alive. Didn't know if anyone was. One night, he handed me that photo, his thumb brushing the corner. "If I don't make it, don't." My voice was sharper than I intended. "Don't you dare talk like that." He studied me, then gave a crooked smile, tired and hollow. "Fine. But if I'm gone, you're telling them I loved them, okay?" The word loved hit me like a stone. Not because of them, but because of the way his voice softened around it. The way I wondered if he could ever say it about me. On the 12th day, we found the river. It glittered like salvation, winding through the forest like a silver scar. We fell to our knees, drinking until our stomachs cramped. Evan's laughter echoed off the Trisa deep, rough sound that startled birds into flight. "For once," he said, wiping water from his mouth. "Something went right." "Don't jinx it," I muttered, though I couldn't stop smiling. We followed the river for miles, hoping it would lead to people, to rescue. But the wilderness stretched endless, a green ocean that swallowed us whole. That night, beside the riverbank, I found him staring at the sky, thinking about them. I asked. He nodded, jaw tight. "You." "My mom," I admitted. "She was probably working late when the news broke. She's always working." My voice cracked, and I had to swallow hard. "She's gonna think I'm dead." Evan reached for my hand. Not my shoulder, not my army hand. His palm was rough, calloused, but the touch was careful, deliberate. "Then we give her a reason not to," he said. And for the first time, I wondered if hope wasn't something you found, but something someone gave you. The crash had taken everything, our sense of safety, our future, our illusions of control. But it also stripped away the lies we tell ourselves every day. Out here, there was no pretending. I wanted him, terrified me, but it was the truest thing I'd ever known. The turning point came on the 18th night. I woke to him thrashing beside me, gasping like he was drowning. His eyes were wide, staring at something only he could see. Sweat drenched his shirt, his chest heaving with silent screams. Evan. I grabbed his shoulders. Hey, it's me. You're okay. You're here. He blinked, wild and lost. Then, without warning, he pulled me into his arms and buried his face in my neck. His whole body shook against mine. I saw it again. He whispered hoarsely. The fire. The screaming. I couldn't see God. Couldn't stop it. I held him, my fingers threading through his damp hair. You don't have to stop it. You just have to be here. With me. His grip tightened. Don't leave me. I won't. It wasn't a promise. It was a vow, carved into the marrow of my bones. That night, neither of us slept alone. He clung to me like I was the only anchor in a storm. And maybe I was. Maybe we both were. For each other. The next morning, something had shifted. He moved differently, softer somehow. He brushed dirt from my cheek with his thumb. He shared the last piece of dried meat without me asking. And when we crossed a fallen tree over the river, his hand lingered in mine longer than necessary, his eyes flicking to my lips before darting away. We didn't talk about it. Not yet. But the silence between us pulsed like a living thing. A week later, we found the cabin. It was hidden in a clearing, half swallowed by vines and moss. The roof sagged. The door hung crooked. But it was shelter. Evan pushed it open, and dust exploded into the air like a sigh of relief. Inside, there was a rusted stove, broken chairs, a single narrow bed. One bed. I glanced at him. He glanced at me. We'll make it work, he said, too quickly. That night, we lay side by side on the creaking mattress, our shoulders brushing in the dark. I could hear his breath, slow and uneven. My own heart thudded so loud I thought it might wake him. Minutes stretched into hours. And then his hand found mine beneath the thin blanket. He didn't speak. Neither did I. But our fingers intertwined, and the silence between us broke. Not with words, but with the kind of honesty only touch can hold. The cabin became our world. Days were spent scavenging, repairing, trying to build something resembling a life. Nights were spent closer than we'd ever dared before. Skin brushing, breaths mingling, the thin line between survival and desire blurring until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Still, he resisted. I could feel it in the way he hesitated, in the way his lips parted like he wanted to say something but swallowed it instead. Until the night the storm returned. Rain pounded the roof, wind howling like wolves outside. We huddled together, the bed shaking with each gust. And suddenly, he snapped. I can't do this anymore, he said, voice breaking. I froze. Do what? Pretend. His eyes burned into mine. Pretend you don't mean more to me than any of this. That I don't fall asleep counting your breaths just to stay sane. That I don't wake up every damn morning terrified you'll be gone. My chest tightened. Evan. No. Listen. His hands framed my face. Desperate. If we die out here, I need you to know. I need you to know you're the only thing that's kept me alive. I should have been afraid. Instead, I laugh Ida broken, shaking laugh. God, you're an idiot. His brow furrowed. What? You think I don't feel the same? And then I kissed him. Not the frantic, storm-born kiss of before, but something slower, deeper, like we were finally speaking the language we were meant to. His lips were warm and unyielding, his hands trembling against my skin. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the crash, not the hunger, not the endless stretch of wilderness. Just us. Just us. From that night on, the cabin wasn't just shelter. It was home. We learned each other like scripture, every scar, every silence, every shiver. He kissed me with reverence, like I was both a prayer and the answer. I touched him with hunger, like I'd been starving my whole life and only just discovered what it meant to be fed. But love is never safe. And ours, born in fire and fear, was destined to be tested. Because the world hadn't forgotten us. And soon, we'd have to face it again. Morning sunlight spilled through the cracks in the cabin walls, painting Evan's face in soft gold. I woke to find him already awake, propped on one elbow, studying me with that quiet intensity that always left me breathless. "What?" I murmured. "Groggy." He smiled faintly. "Just making sure you're real." I reached up, brushing my fingers across his jaw. "I'm real. You're stuck with me." For the first time since the crash, his shoulders seemed to relax. Like he believed it. The cabin gave us routine, and routine gave us something we hadn't had in weeks. Peace. We split chores without needing to discuss them. Evan hunted, cleaned. We both foraged. Sometimes, he'd teach me how to set snares, his big hands guiding mine. Other times, I tell him stories about home, about the city noise I used to complain about my mom's late-night TV habits. At night, after exhaustion dragged us to the narrow bed, we'd curl into each other, his arm heavy over my waist, my face tucked into the warm hollow of his throat. Sleep no longer felt like surrender, felt like sanctuary. And yet, beneath that fragile peace, there was always the question, what if someone found us? It happened on the 27th day. We heard the helicopter before we saw Ida distant thrum, unnatural against the silence of the forest. My heart lurched into my throat. Evan bolted upright, I sharp, scanning the sky through the gaps in the roof. "Signal them," I shouted, fumbling for anything reflective. He yanked a shard of broken mirror from his pack, flashing it toward the sound. The helicopter circled, hovered, then dipped lower. My knees buckled with relief. We were saved. But when I turned to Evan, his face wasn't relief, it was dread. Hours later, we were bundled in blankets, loaded into the back of a rescue truck. Medics checked our vitals, handed us water bottles that tasted too clean, too foreign. "You'll be home soon," one said with a reassuring smile. Home. The word didn't fit anymore. Not after the forest. Not after him. I glanced at Evan. His jaw was clenched, his gaze fixed out the window, away from me. The space between us on that bench felt wider than any wilderness. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and hope. Reporters swarmed outside, cameras flashing, shouting our names. Survivors of the crash. They called us, as if that label explained everything, as if they understood. Inside, family faces blurred with tears. I was crushed in my mother's arms, her sobs shaking my body. I should have felt joy. Instead, I felt hollow, because across the room, Evan stood alone. His sister arrived an hour later, clutching him so tightly he winced. 2 kids clung to his legs, their small voices crying, "Uncle Evan." And for the first time, I saw him smile like sunlight. A smile not meant for me. Something in my chest splintered. The days after were worse than the forest. Doctors poked. Therapists hovered. Strangers whispered. They called us heroes, miracles, statistics. They didn't call us what we really were. Two men who had built a world in the ashes of another, only to have it ripped apart by rescue. At night, I lay in a hospital bed too soft, too sterile, staring at the ceiling. Couldn't sleep. Not without his warmth. Not without his breath in my ear. I told myself he was just down the hall. I told myself he'd come. But he didn't. On the fifth night, I found him outside, sitting on the hospital steps, cigarette burning between his fingers. "You don't even smoke," I said, sitting beside him. He didn't look at me. "I do now." The silence stretched. I could hear the hum of traffic, the chatter of nurses behind us. It all felt so loud, so wrong. Finally, I whispered, "I can't sleep without you." His hand trembled. Ash fell to the ground. Still, he didn't meet my eyes. "You have to," he said hoarsely. "We can't keep this here. Out there. It's different." My chest tightened. "Different how? You don't feel the same." His jaw worked. "I feel too much. That's the problem." The words hit harder than any crash. He tried to pull away. He tried to bury us under duty, under family, under the expectations of a world that hadn't seen what we'd seen. But every time our eyes met across crowded rooms, the forest came back. The cabin. The storm. The kiss. We weren't free of it. We never would be. One night, weeks later, I showed up at his apartment. My knuckles bruised from knocking, my throat raw from repeating his name. When he finally opened the door, he looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "I can't do it," I said, voice breaking. "I can't pretend." For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then his shoulders sagged, and he pulled me inside, shutting the door behind us. His hands found my face, his forehead pressed to mine. "Neither can I." And in that tiny apartment, miles away from the wilderness, we collapsed into each other like the world had finally stopped trying to tear us apart. But the truth was, survival had been the easy part. The real fight, the fight to love openly, to hold onto each other in a world that didn't understand, was only just beginning. Evan wasn't mine when the world returned to us. That was the cruelest truth. Out there, under the canopy of trees and the roar of storms, he had belonged to me completely, body, breath, heartbeat. But here, under fluorescent lights and watchful eyes, he was everyone else's first. A brother, an uncle, a son. I was last in line. The hospital discharged me after 3 weeks. My mother drove me home in silence, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She didn't ask about Evan. She didn't ask what happened in the forest. She asked if I wanted chicken soup, if I needed new clothes, if I could go back to school when I was ready. Normal questions. Small, suffocating questions. I wanted to scream. I died in that crash. I was reborn in his arms. None of this fits anymore. Instead, I nodded and stared out the window, watching a world that no longer belonged to me. Evan called once. Just once. "How are you holding up?" he asked, voice rough, like gravel dragged across asphalt. "Breathing," I said. "Good." A pause. "That's good." The silence pressed heavy between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. That he couldn't sleep without me. That I woke up clawing at empty sheets. That the cabin hadn't been a fantasy, it had been the truest version of us. But neither of us said it, because saying it would make it real. And real was dangerous. It was his sister who broke the stalemate. She called me on a rainy afternoon, her voice sharp, urgent. "He's not okay." My heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "He barely eats. He won't talk. At night, I hear him pacing. I thought her voice cracked. I thought maybe you could reach him. The next thing I knew, I was standing outside his apartment again, rain soaking through my jacket. He opened the door, and my chest clenched. He looked thinner, shadows bruising the skin under his eyes. He stared at me like I was a ghost. "Why are you here?" he whispered. "Because you're falling apart." I shot back. "And so am I." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You shouldn't be here. If people leave your mom. Screw my mom. Screw people." My voice shook. "You're the only one who knows. The only one who was there. Don't take that away from me." For a long moment, the storm outside filled the silence. Then, with a broken sound, he pulled me inside and kissed me like drowning men drink air. We didn't call it love. Not yet. We called it survival. Again. But this time, survival meant hiding. We stole moments in his apartment. Blinds drawn. Voices hushed. We carved out hours between family obligations and work, clinging to each other like fugitives. It wasn't enough, but it was all we had. Until the night his sister walked in. I'll never forget the look on her face. Shock first. Then confusion. Then something like betrayal. "Evan," she whispered, as if she couldn't trust her eyes. We sprang apart, guilt crashing down like the storm outside. I tried to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. "It's not what you think," Evan began, but even he didn't sound convinced. Her gaze darted between us, tears welling. "After everything, after the crasherie," she shook her head. "I thought you were stronger than this." And then she was gone, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the walls. Evan sank onto the couch, head in his hands. "This is it," he muttered. "She'll never forgive me." I knelt in front of him, gripping his wrists. "You don't need her forgiveness. You don't need anyone's." But his eyes, God, his eyes were drowning in guilt. "I need hers. She's all I've got." The days after were hell. She stopped answering his calls. Stopped letting him see the kids. He was shattered, caught between two halves of himself, the man who had built a life in the wreckage with me, and the man his family needed him to be. And I, God help me, began to wonder if I was selfish for asking him to choose. My mother found out soon after. Not from me. From whispers. From looks. From the way I smiled when my phone lit up with his name. She cornered me in the kitchen, her voice trembling with something sharper than anger. "Tell me it's not true." I froze. "Tell you what?" "That you..." She couldn't even finish the sentence. "With him. After the crash." I swallowed hard. "It's true." Her hand flew to her mouth. She shook her head, tears spilling. "After everything I went through, raising you alone, you're going to throw your life away like this?" "Throw it away." My voice cracked. "Mom, he saved me. He's the reason I'm alive." "He's the reason you're ruined," she snapped. The words sliced clean through me. For the first time since the crash, I felt like I was falling again. Evan and I drifted. Not because we stopped loving, but because the world pressed too hard, demanded too much. Nights apart stretched into weeks. His texts grew shorter, mine more desperate. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the cabin walls closing in, the storm outside, the bed too small but still enough. I missed him like missing a limb. And then, one night, he showed up at my door, soaked from rain, shaking. "I can't do it anymore," he said. "I can't live like you're not mine." Before I could respond, he kissed me, fierce and frantic. like every second apart had been torture. I pulled him inside, and we collapsed together. No words, just skin, just breath, just the truth we'd been starving for. The next morning, we made a choice. No more hiding. No more pretending. If the world wanted to break us, let it try. Because after everything, after fire and wreckage and storm, Sue had already survived the worst. But survival, I would learn, was only the first battle. Because love, out in the open, is a war all its own. The morning after our choice felt deceptively ordinary. Coffee steamed between us, the city outside humming with indifference. But everything had changed. For the first time since the crash, we weren't hiding. We weren't pretending. You sure about this? Evan asked, his fingers drumming the side of his mug. His eyes, those restless, storm-colored eyes, searched mine for any flicker of doubt. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. I've never been more sure of anything. His mouth curved into the faintest smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. He wanted to believe me. He wanted to believe himself. But fear still shadowed the edges of his face. We started small, walking side by side down the street. No space between us. His knuckles brushing mine, sometimes daring to intertwine. Sharing a booth at diners, our knees pressed together under the table. These little rebellions felt enormous, like shouting secrets into the sun. But not everyone saw it as harmless. One night, as we left a grocery store, a man shouldered past us, muttering, "Disgusting." Evan stiffened, his fists curled, his body shifting like he might swing. I touched his arm. "Don't. Please." His jaw worked, but he let it go. Later, though, I could still feel the tension radiating off him, even as he held me on the couch. "I can take it," I whispered. "I don't want you to have to," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. The real battle came at home. My mother stopped speaking to me altogether. She left meals on the counter, but her eyes passed over me like I was invisible. The silence screamed louder than words ever could. Evan's sister was harsher. She sent him messages sharp enough to bleed. "You're not the man I thought you were. The kids won't be around you until you get your head straight." I watched him crumble under the weight of her rejection. And every time, I wanted to scream at the world. We almost died. We found love in the ashes. Why isn't that enough for you? One night, after his sister's latest text, Evan broke. He paced the apartment, hands raking through his hair, voice raw. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm selfish. Maybe I should have left it in the woods." My chest caved. "You don't mean that." He spun on me, eyes blazing with something between pain and fury. "Don't I? Look at what I've lost. My family, my home, hell, even my job's on the line because some coworker saw us at the diner." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "So what? You'd trade me for all that?" The silence after nearly killed me. But then his face crumpled. "God, no. I don't know how to carry both. You and them." I stepped closer, pressing my palm against his chest. His heartbeat thundered under my hand. "Then don't carry it alone. Let me carry it with you." For a moment, the storm in his eyes eased. He pulled me into him, holding on like I was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. We realized hiding wasn't protecting us anymore. It was strangling us. So we made another choice. To tell the truth. Publicly. Together. It started with an interview. A local paper had been begging for our Story 2 crash survivors, pulled from the wreckage against all odds. We'd been dodging them for weeks, but this time, we said yes. The reporter leaned forward, recorder blinking red. Tell Muhat kept you alive out there. Evan and I exchanged a look. My pulse pounded. This was it. Each other, I said. The reporter blinked. Sorry. Evan straightened, his hand sliding onto mine where it rested on my knee. He's right. We kept each other alive. Not just out there, but after. And we're not going to hide it anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. The reporter's pen stilled mid-scribble. But I felt lighter than I had in months. We walked out of that interview hand in hand, ready to burn down whatever bridges the world didn't want us to cross. The backlash came swift. Online comments dripped venom. Anonymous calls hissed slurs into the receiver. Evan's sister refused to answer the door when he tried to visit. But there was light, too. Messages from strangers. Your story gave me courage. I thought I was alone until I read about you. Thank you for surviving, for loving. One letter, written in shaky handwriting, simply said, because of you, I didn't give up. Evan held that letter for a long time, eyes shining. Maybe this is what we're meant to do, he whispered. Still, nights were hardest. He'd toss and turn, haunted by nightmares. Some nights, he woke gasping, clawing for me like he was back in the wreckage. I'd hold him until his breathing steadied, whispering, I'm here. You're safe. We made it. Other nights, it was me jolting awake, sweat cold on my skin, the sound of tearing metal echoing in my ears. And always, his arms around me, pulling me back from the edge. We weren't cured. We weren't whole. But we were healing together. Then came the reunion. The crash survivors were invited to a memorial service, honoring those who hadn't made it. Standing among the wreckage families, the press, the officials, felt surreal, like stepping into a nightmare dressed as ceremony. My mother stood stiff beside me, eyes forward, lips tight. Evan's sister was there too, children clutching her hands. She hadn't spoken to him since that night. Halfway through the service, Evan reached for my hand. I froze. My mother's glare burned the side of my face. His sister's lips pressed into a hard line. But his hand didn't tremble. And slowly I slid my fingers into his. Gasps rippled. Whispers hissed. But I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt steady. Afterward, his sister approached. Her eyes were wet, her jaw tight. You embarrassed us, she snapped. But her voice cracked. Evan held his ground. I'm done hiding. For a long moment, she stared at him, breathing hard. Then, to my shock, her gaze softened. You really love him. He didn't hesitate. More than my own life. Something in her broke then. She pulled him into a shaky embrace, whispering, I don't understand it. But I don't want to lose you, either. The kids crowded around his legs, tugging at him, giggling through tears. And for the first time, I saw him breathe easy with them again. That night, as we lay tangled in his bed, he whispered into my hair, I think we're finally building something real. I smiled against his chest. We already did. Back in the forest. This is just making it last. He kissed the top of my head, and for the first time since the crash, sleep came without nightmares. Because now, we weren't surviving. We were living. Together. The winter passed, and with it, the raw edges of grief began to soften. Life didn't magically become easy, but it became ours. Evan and I found a rhythm in the city, a life stitched together with quiet mornings, messy dinners, and nights where his laughter filled every corner of the apartment. We weren't invincible. We argued over bills, over laundry, over who ate the last slice of pizza. But even in those moments, I never doubted the weight of his love. One evening, after a long day, I came home to find him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, music low. He was cooking something ambitious, judging by the chaos of pots and pans. I leaned in the doorway, grinning. Should I call for takeout now or later? He shot me a look, lips twitching. You're gonna regret mocking me when you taste this masterpiece. Masterpiece? I walked up behind him, sliding my arms around his waist, resting my chin on his shoulder. Smells like smoke and regret. He laughed, shaking his head. But then he stilled, turning in my arms to face me. His eyes softened in that way that always unraveled me. What? I asked, suddenly breathless. Nothing, he said quietly. Just sometimes I look at you and can't believe we made it. That you're here. That we're real. I kissed him before he could say more, tasting the salt of his words, the truth of his fear. Because I knew it too. We'd walked through fire and wreckage. And somehow, we'd found each other intact. The nightmares grew fewer. They never vanished completely, but they lost their power. When they came, they no longer dragged us under, they reminded us of how far we'd climbed. Some mornings, I'd wake to him already awake, watching me with a look that was equal parts wonder and peace. Could you maybe not stare at me like I'm a museum exhibit? I'd mumble. Sorry. He'd whisper. I just like knowing you're real. Spring brought new beginnings. The paper story about us had spread farther than we expected. We were invited to speak at a survivors group, men and women who'd endured fires, accidents, wars, people carrying invisible scars, just like us. I was nervous, palms sweating as I stepped up to the podium. But Evan's hand found mine, grounding me. I told them about fear, about the nights we thought we'd die in the woods, and the mornings we woke up surprised to still be breathing. About the shame and the whispers when we came back, and the courage it took to keep holding on anyway. And finally, about love. Not the storybook kind, not the perfect kind, but the kind that saves you when the world burns. When I finished, there were tears in the room. Some from them, some from me. Afterward, a young man approached. His voice trembled as he said, I didn't think I'd ever say this out loud, but seeing you too, I think maybe I can. Evan squeezed my shoulder, eyes shining. That night, he whispered in bed, if even one person feels less alone because of US.IT was worth everything. We visited the crash site that summer. The forest had begun to reclaim it. Trees pushing through twisted metal. Wildflowers sprouting between scars of blackened earth. Felt sacred, in a way. Not because of the wreckage, but because it was where we were reborn. Evan knelt, brushing his fingers over a piece of scorched metal. This should have been the end. I crouched beside him, threading my hand through his. But it wasn't. He looked at me then, really looked, with tears cutting paths down his cheeks. You're my miracle. And in that quiet, with sunlight slanting through the trees, I believed him. Months later, he surprised me. We were walking home from the Memorial Walla New One, engraved with the names of those we'd lost. I traced my fingers over them, whispering silent promises to remember. On the way back, under the glow of streetlights, he stopped. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket. Evan, I breathed. He pulled out a small box, awkward and perfect. I don't have a speech. I don't have the right words. I just know that I don't want another day without you. Not after everything we've been through. The world blurred. My throat closed. Yes, I said, before he could even open it. Yes, 1,000 times. His laugh broke into a sob as he slid the simple band onto my finger. Then he kissed me there in the middle of the sidewalk. Like the world could watch if it wanted because nothing mattered except us. We didn't rush the wedding. We didn't need to. Just wearing the promise on my hand was enough. But when the day finally came, it wasn't grand or glamorous. It was small, intimate, family and friends who chose to stand with us, not against us. Even his sister came. She cried through the ceremony, holding her kids close. My mother didn't attend, but she sent a letter. It was short, but it said, "I hope you're happy. I hope one day I'll be brave enough to see you as you are." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. That night, beneath fairy lights strung across the backyard, Evan pulled me into the quiet. "Remember when we thought survival was the best we'd get?" He whispered. I nodded, leaning into him. "Now look at us." He smiled, pressing his forehead to mine. "We didn't just survive. We found life again." We danced there, slow and unhurried, the world spinning soft around us. And for the first time since the crash, I felt something like peace settle in my bones. We still carry scars. Some you can see, some you can't. But every night, when he falls asleep in my arms, breathing even and steady, I know this, the crash took so much from us. But it gave us something too. It gave us each other. And that is more than enough. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.